panic. Welcome, Dr. Alfred.
Okay, thank you. Okay, technology, sorry. Okay, well, once again, good afternoon to everyone, to a session I think that I was really looking forward to. It is our panel on inclusive green finance that I think we have prepared for quite some time. We're really looking forward to having this under the title of Responding to the Climate Emergency, Inclusive Green Finance. Now, let me maybe start by saying that a lot of discussion in the past days was around the issue of convergence of policy solutions, but also convergence around the concerns of some of the risks that we are facing in the AFI network. And climate emergency is certainly an area where the convergence can be felt because it's a global issue. So there's global convergence around the solutions. And AFI felt that within this global convergence, there is a gap, there is a niche, which is in fact the niche of inclusive green finance that this network has a mandate and an obligation to fill. Now, as we have heard and as we witness, the climate change is actually not happening in the future. It is already happening, and we, I think, expressed our sympathy with our members from the Bahamas already during the AGM, when we have seen the devastating effects and the destruction following the Hurricane Dorian in the Bahamas. And these extreme weather events really are because of climate change becoming more frequent and more powerful. Climate change will be affecting definitely those at the economic bottom of the pyramid. The most vulnerable people will suffer most. And this is exactly why a network which is basically composed by regulators from developing and emerging economies need to take this into account. Now, research has shown that climate change might push an additional 100 million people into poverty by 2013, and this data comes from the World Bank. And in addition, that those who are most disadvantaged, like women and youth, will be even more disproportionately affected. In this network, we have been pioneering to discuss and recognize the linkages between climate change and financial inclusion, and we have recognized and worked with how financial inclusion can build resilience to climate change, and we are part of a global solution. What is clear is that we hold some of the solutions definitely in our own hands, solutions to these global challenges. And because financial inclusion, which is namely access to formal savings, credit, insurance, other services, builds resilience to climate change. And I'm sure on this panel we will even get examples from some of our members. But it also enables the mitigation of climate change amongst individuals, and particularly the MSMEs, the small and medium-sized entrepreneurs. And this is exactly green finance, how we see it, as inclusive green finance. Now, AFI's proposition is that there is an important role for financial regulators and policymakers to play with developing and implementing policies and regulation that enables inclusive green finance. And the solution The solution is unique, and we as network are the ones championing this emergency, but also these emerging policy areas. And the idea of inclusive green finance brings a new dimension to financial inclusion, but also a whole new dimension to the ongoing debates on green finance. Now, focusing on building resilience at the bottom of the economic pyramid through financial inclusion is unique. And this is a perspective that we as a network are bringing to the table in the broader green finance discussions, like with what the Network for Greening the Financial Inclusion, the NGFS, has already started. And I understand that some of the members are even now considering the membership in the NGFS, which is an important signal. There is a growing recognition of the value of inclusive green finance, and this is really an area where AFI as a network can bring a lot of new thinking and complementarity to work done in developed economies. Now, our work on inclusive green finance is now moving from recognizing how financial inclusion can build resilience to climate change to providing peer support and exchange on the development and implementation of IGF policies. And this work stream, I can tell you, is developing very rapidly. We got aware in our member needs assessment, our most recent member needs assessment, that it showed that this is the AFI work stream with the strongest growth in satisfaction rate in 2019, where we actually had quite a jump in terms of satisfaction by the members. And we also have just launched this document that you have seen, which is the survey from some of our members that came with a draft policy framework on inclusive green finance, what we call the 4 Ps, the 4 pillars, which are provision, promotion, protection, and prevention. And all of the members, I think, have added their individual policy solutions into this framework. Now, part of making this work stream possible is the International Climate Initiative, IKI, with the support from the German Ministry for the Environment, who is supporting this work stream. This panel will dive into inclusive green finance, exploring some concrete policy examples, but also reflecting how IGF sits in the bigger picture. But before we listen to the members and to the experts, I think we should now first listen to someone who is more from the bottom of the pyramid perspective, engaged in this situation, and feels the necessity every day of this problem and the pressure to find the solutions. And in this sense, I would like to welcome to this roundtable Lea Namugerba. Lea Namugerba is a 15-year-old youth activist from Uganda. She is here with her father, Sepas Lukwago. Thank you for bringing your daughter here to talk to us. Lea is part of the global movement of school strikers, organizing the Fridays for Futures to raise awareness about climate change and inspire action by decision makers. She has been striking every Friday since February this year for greater action on climate change and to bring an end to plastic pollution. She recently turned 15, so I suppose it's the youngest person we ever had at the GPF, if I'm right. And for her birthday, she wished for 200 trees being planted. Now she will share her thoughts and message with us, bringing the you from her generation. Lea, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon to all of you. I first of all want to thank the organizers of this forum for inviting me and most importantly, including this very important session. The session was given a befitting title, Responding to Climate Emergency, Inclusive Green Finance. I have a very important message to you all from my generation. I've come here not to speak for myself, but on behalf of young people across the globe. Young people are busy fixing a mess that they did not create. Young people from Kampala to New York, Cape Town to New York are raising up for the climate crisis. Each day we are finding solutions to the changing climate, which has now turned into a climate emergency. Ladies and gentlemen, if there is an emergency or fire outbreak, we see a lot of urgency and action taken to extinguish the fire. And if fire started in this building, most people will not remain seated. We need to do the same while responding to climate emergency. I also have a message from the planet. It sent me to tell you that it is in pain. The climate crisis is the first common crisis humanity has ever faced. It does not matter whether you're a child, adult, Christian, Muslim, poor, rich, educated, female or male. We are all victims. Humanity is under threat. We need to join hands and fight for our survival. We need to act fast. There are many environmental issues happening across the continent, but I barely see them on media or reported by anyone. The silence on climate emergency seems to be intention. Media is always reporting politics and celebrity gossip. Most people do not care what they are doing to the environment. We need to act fast. Africa contributes less than 5% of the global emissions, but we are more vulnerable to the effects of climate change. Climate change are hitting us harder, as we all see in Africa. Climate change is hitting us harder, as we all see in Africa. The deadly storms that hit Mozambique and some parts of Zimbabwe and Tanzania are a brand hit that the worst is coming if we continue without inaction. Farmers in East Africa are complaining, are counting losses year after year for the past decade. Our planet is bleeding blood instead of water. We need to act fast. Green financing is one of the best responses to the climate emergency, which should be emulated by every country. I commend the initiative taken by the government of Rwanda to promote sustainable development. I wish other countries create funds like Rwanda did. We are standing in front of common challenges, and we need all to act to solve these challenges. It is through cooperation that we can do all this. Climate change is already felt by so many people, and there must be real investments into adaptation and resilience building to make sure that no one is left behind. I noticed adults were not willing to offer leadership, and I volunteered myself. I started to offer leadership by school striking for climate every Friday. I thank Greta for inspiring me to take this noble decision. I no longer celebrate birthdays with parties. I instead plant trees. I planted 200 trees when I was turning 15 last month. I've started to give tree samplings to people who want to celebrate their birthdays like I do. I started a petition to ban plastic bags in Uganda. I'm not about to stop. I have to take action. If adults are not willing to offer leadership, I and fellow children will lead them. I'm not too young to make a positive difference. Why should I watch on as environmental injustice is happening before my eyes? Injustice to the environment is injustice to me. This is a fight I'm prepared to take on to its end. I invite you all to join me on the global climate strike on the 20th and the 27th of September and fight for everyone's future. If you fear to stand tall for climate, then support those who are doing it. Ladies and gentlemen, I remind you that we do not have planet B. We do not have planet B. If we do not protect and defend our own planet, we will not have no one to blame but ourselves. Ladies and gentlemen, the sooner the countries are able to invest in renewable energy and to strengthen their resilience to climate crisis impact, the better the prognosis for humanity and the planet. We have a responsibility to find ways to make that happen. We are facing a climate emergency. Let us treat it like it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. And for those ones who have arrived late, Leah is a 15-year-old youth activist from Uganda who came with her father to this event to share her views on the climate emergency with us. Thank you, Leah. Now, we have a panel, and I would like to invite our panelists to the stage. DG, Deputy Governor Esala Masitabua from Reserve Bank of Fiji. Deputy Governor Elsie Adu Avazi, Bank of Ghana. Andreas Proksch, Director General Sector and Global Programs of GIZ. And Jose Cantero Siendra, the President of the Central Bank of Paraguay. Now, before we start this discussion, Johanna will come to the stage and facilitate our first poll with the audience. Thank you.
Panel, we will be having a poll to all of you. So please take your mobile phones and open the GPS app. When the app is open, press the schedule icon and choose today's session. The session responding to the climate emergency, inclusive green finance. And there will be the possibility to choose poll number 1. I hope you have all opened the app, chosen the session, and opened poll number 1. The question is, how are you experiencing climate change in your country? And you have possibility of choosing multiple of the answers through droughts, floods, hurricanes or cyclones, rising sea levels, extreme heat, extreme rain or hail, melting glaciers, or none of the above. Please make your choices. I think some answers are still coming in, but we can clearly see that climate change is something affecting all the countries represented here in the room today, and in quite different ways. I think this is a good first reflection to start when kicking up the discussions about inclusive green finance. Thank you.
Thank you, Johanna, for this first poll, which I think we still have in front of our eyes. Now we have a very distinguished panel with us, and I really would like to use this opportunity to tease out the specific solutions that some of our regulators are already working on, and of course also how they see their responsibility and role when it comes to the mitigation of the climate emergencies. Now, Deputy Governor Esala Masitabua from Reserve Bank of Fiji, we all know that Fiji is a country that is potentially always in danger of climate emergencies, and you have had devastating impact in your country in history. Now, you also, on the other hand, have already been very active in the international scene. I think the Fiji has played a very important role in the COP process. And I think we also discussed these issues a year ago when we came to Fiji to kick off the work stream on IGF, Inclusive Green Finance, in the AFI network. Before I ask the question that I have here and that you know already, I wanted to ask you, what do you think about what Leah told us? What is your view on the perspectives that Leah shared with us?
Thank you, Alfred. I think in composing my thoughts for this panel, I'm extremely privileged to be here and also to listen to what Han had, she had, the message from the younger generation. And it's sort of, it is part of our responsibilities that I see and that I was going to share on the responsibilities of our as financial regulators. I like the thing that she mentioned about there's no planet B. This is it for us. We've got only one go at this, and when that's over, and that responsibility is on us. And also the other thing just comes to mind, Alfred, as she mentioned planting trees. Someone once told, or someone once said that to plant a tree is an ultimate act of profound selflessness. Because if you plant a tree, you don't know whether you will benefit from the shade, from the fruits of that tree. So to plant a tree is an ultimate act of selflessness. And to me, climate change calls on us, all our generation here, to do the heavy lifting for the future generations. So that's the enormity of the challenge before us, and I think that's what underpins the message from the younger generation to us.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I mean, if everything goes according to plan, apparently then we will be gone by the time when Leah is still on the planet, isn't it? So we are actually in a situation that we have a responsibility even beyond our time. And I think this came out quite nicely from this intervention. Now, Deputy Governor Elsie, you want to share on the Ghanaian approach and particularly the interesting activities Bank of Ghana is already entertaining. But before you do that, maybe you also want to share on your, how you received these statements from the young person.
Well, I'd like to congratulate Leah. I really am touched and encouraged that a young woman like Leah is not afraid to challenge us adults to respond to this emergency and to put in place measures that provide a better future for her. So Leah, thank you very much for showing us the way. On the part of Bank of Ghana, I'd like to talk about a sustainable banking initiative that we have launched in partnership with the Association of Banks as well as with the Environmental Protection Agency. I'm going to talk a little bit about the principles, but let me say that this initiative has been in response to the emergency that Leah has made us aware about. This initiative is saying that as a central bank ourselves and regulator, we do see the direct connection between climate change and macroeconomic stability, financial stability, and even more broadly, long-term economic sustainability and with the well-being of our people. So this initiative really sets out a set of principles you will see now on the screen that help to, first of all, create awareness, that also seek to mitigate the effects of climate change, as well as empower the likes of Leah going forward. Why is that so critical to us? We're not Fiji, we're not the Bahamas, but we have our peculiar circumstances, and we're beginning to see climate change play out uniquely in our environment. Ghana is a commodity-based economy, largely, based on cocoa. Alfred talked a lot about Ghana cocoa and our chocolates, which he enjoyed. I brought a box here. This is really the mainstay of the Ghanaian economy, and it's been for decades. We also have mining, gold, bauxite, as well as more recently oil and gas. Now, the question for us is how do we continue to make these sources of livelihood for our people and for the economy sustainable? And while doing that, how can we ensure that we are not depleting our environment. We all know the hazards of mining, of oil and gas, as well as even agriculture if it's not done properly. So this is one of the big questions we're responding to. The other thing is that agriculture and forestry create about 45% of the jobs in Ghana. So how do we ensure that we're thinking forward and preserving the livelihoods of people? And then we have the social issues that we're also looking at through these initiatives. Some of you may have heard of child labor in the farming communities, in the fishing communities, along the coastal areas. How can we ensure that parents send their children, like Leah, to school and not use them on the farms or in the fishing communities instead of educating them and making sure that they have a better future ahead of them? So these are some of the immediate concerns we're responding to through these initiatives. And if we could go back to the principles, I'll just very quickly go through a set of 7 principles, like I said, jointly developed with the industry as well as the Environmental Protection Agency, basically helping to identify, measure, and mitigate the impact of climate change, really. And you will find that in these principles, we also recognize that we need to empower gender, especially women, and we need to ensure financial inclusion as a way of protecting the most vulnerable so that they can respond better to the effects of climate change. The banks themselves, I might add, Alfred, are very much on board. This was jointly developed by them, but we have all 23 bank CEOs signing on to these principles and saying that they do not only believe that this is the right thing to do, but it also makes business sense, ultimately. And so that's what we've been working on.
Yeah, I would still have a follow-up question, and this is about building resilience. How do you think can financial inclusion build resilience to climate change amongst those who are the most vulnerable? Because you are speaking about the banks. I suppose the banks are perhaps working with many, maybe not only with the most vulnerable. How do you see that?
Well, that's true. Let me say that first and foremost, the banks themselves contribute a substantial amount of our GDP. So they themselves taking ownership to say we would ensure under Principle 2 that our carbon footprint is reduced, that we ourselves are empowering women within our banks. We ourselves are closing the gender gap and are using our lending power to ensure that the projects that we're financing are environmentally friendly. I believe that that's a key way the banks are helping. We expect that they promote financial inclusion to the bottom of the pyramid, but even to their large clients, that they're able to insist that these principles are met while funding large projects. And so we're hoping that the banks, for example, tap into global sources of green finance to lend, to support green, for example, solar plants and other renewable energy projects, and whatever projects they're funding, that they ensure that these projects do not contribute to global climate change around the world.
Well, thank you very much. We will have another round. I'm tempted to drill down on what you mentioned, the relationship between the green finance and the macroeconomic stability.
Yes.
I come back to this, but
Sure.
let us maybe now invite Johanna for our second poll.
So it's time for the second poll. You know the drill by now. Please take out your phones, open the app, choose the session title, and open poll number 2. We have now heard some examples of responses and policies on inclusive green finance. Now it's your turn to share with us if your institution is working on inclusive green finance. You have the options: have not thought about it yet, planning to start, started first actions, or plan in place and implementing. Please choose your answers. some results are still coming in, but I think we can see a quite interesting trend here in the answers. Some not even thinking about it yet, and I hope this session can inspire you to take first actions, but also a lot of institutions planning to start to take action, but not so many yet having a plan in place and implementing. So with that, I give back to the panel. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Johanna, for this second poll. Let us now invite Andreas from the GIZ, who I think has seen a lot in his work related to the global relevance of the Sustainable Development Goals, including, of course, the ones that are related with the climate change. Now, my question to Andreas is that knowing that GIZ works on protection policies with a number of partner countries, more specifically around climate risk insurance, I would like to know, how do you see the role of the financial regulator in relation to this type of insurance, and what are the lessons learned from that work?
Thank you very much, Alfred, for being here on the panel, and thank you for your question. Please allow me to start also with 2 sentences of reference to Lea. You said in your own introduction, Alfred, that climate change is not something which is going to happen in future, but that is happening already. But when the real effects of climate change will be seeable and feelable on this world, many of us sitting here will be no longer around. Lea will be. And so I think it's very understandable and also very rational that young men and young women like Lea, like Greta Thunberg, are really taking their fate in their hands, seeing what the older generation is changing, but also seeing what the elder generation is not being able to fix. And so, Lea, I can just encourage you, keep on doing. It's your planet, and you have to save it much more than we as the elder generation have. And once again, congratulations. Coming to German Development Cooperation, for us the issue of climate change has already become reality, and many of our funds are already directed in the fights against climate change, and particularly green finance. Green finance covers a lot of different areas, of different activities. For instance, cooperation with commercial banks to extend their green lending portfolio, for instance, for renewable energy sources, guarantee funds, financing of mitigation and adaptation approaches. And one of the areas of activities is indeed climate insurance, and we are very much involved in this reason. The basic goal for German Development Cooperation executed by GIZ with regard to climate insurance is to create functioning climate insurance markets in developing and emerging economies. Our aim is that people with low incomes can protect themselves with the help of insurance schemes against the financial consequences from extreme weather event and climate change. I think we can see right now 2 very clear tendencies in this point I'm talking about. From the climate side, there is a rapidly changing risk patterns. You know all, we have changing rain patterns, flooding, storms, extreme weather events, and on the other hand, from the technology side, help may appear. Applications of blockchain and remote sensing in insurance might be a key in future for better insurance schemes. Alfred, you had asked me about some lessons learned. And I think there are a lot of lessons learned, but I will very briefly mention 3 lessons which we have learned so far, and I would really like to emphasize we are still in the learning phase. Number one, what we have learned, every country is very wise to develop a comprehensive climate risk management strategy to better deal with related risks. It must include measures for risk reduction, risk adaptation, as well as risk transfer. Second lesson, what we have learned, new climate insurance products are required, and insurance and finance regulators have to pay greater attention to it. We have seen that at present there are very complicated, for instance, capital requirements which should be looked into, and as most of the climate insurance schemes are index-based insurance, most countries don't have any regulation at all how to deal with index-based insurance, and this is also very important. And the third lesson, what we have learned, is that we need an insurance literacy campaign. If you really think that, for instance, especially for small farmers, small fisher folks in the Pacific Islands, for instance, their future will be based on climate insurance schemes, they have to understand better how they work and how they can protect them. And for that, we need really a very comprehensive and strong campaign to tell them what is it all about. These, for the beginning, 3 lessons that we learned the hard way. Thank you.
Thank you. We have taken note of these lessons, and I suppose when we open up to the audience, we might even get additional follow-up questions on this. Let me turn now to Jose Cantero Siena, who is the president of the Central Bank of Paraguay. I wanted to ask you a small question first, which is a bit provocative. We all know, that central banks, normally what they do is not always popular. It's not always popular. Increasing interest rates, closing down banks, supervising institutions, and then there is climate. You can do something good, right? No, my question is, why are you doing it? Do you see a real motivation, or is it because you want to make another contribution? Because normally, what you're doing is maybe seen in a different light, but maybe not always in the positive. So what's your motivation? And what have you gone through in this thinking process?
Yeah, thank you. So I want to share a unusual story of a transformation. It's unusual because it implies commercial banks being as catalyst of positive change, and at the same time, I would say a transformation of a central bank, in that case, that of Paraguay. Paraguay is a small, open economy, quite dynamic. In the last 15 years, we have been growing at a rate of 4.5%, with huge social transformation. Poverty was reduced from a level of 50% to 20%. Extreme poverty is at a level of 5%. But this transformation was not free. It came with a cost. Successive administrative government has emphasized on the need of expanding the agricultural frontier. As a result, Paraguay had experienced one of the highest deforestation rate in the world. And this is kind of a paradox, because at the same time, our country is one of the highest producer of clean energy per capita in the world. So I think that the banking sector throughout time has ignored this damaging process also the Central Bank of Paraguay. But things start to change in 2012, where 4 banks decided to sit in a round table to create a new mechanism to mitigate climate risk and climate exposure to their balance. So this round table that was on a collaborative basis, the first purpose was to understand the problem, to have a better understanding, to see what they can do. And I think that when they create this platform of voluntary collaboration, they also share new experience and incorporate best international practices. So what they did is, in my view, something remarkable. They decided to evaluate their clients with respect to climate risk. They decided to mitigate environmental risk with the thinking that if they can do that, they can also reduce credit risk, mitigate legal risk, and also reputational risk. So, given that there were no formal norms or regulations in Paraguay to analyze this type of risk, they decided to go one step further and adopt their own norms. They create these norms to evaluate risk, and they decided on a voluntary basis to monitor their clients, to evaluate their clients, and to manage environmental risk. So and in 2016, as you can, I don't know if it is in this slide, they issue a livestock guidelines. In 2017, they issue an agricultural guideline, and in 18, an agro-industry guideline, so that they can use, even though there were no formal norms to evaluate and to monitor those risks. So the question is, what did we do at the central bank? I think that the first thing that we do was to recognize that leadership, to recognize that effort and that new way of thinking. So we sit in a round table with them, and we decided that we have to make this sustainable in time. So we make the decision that the central bank will issue a regulation that will make mandatory for every bank in the financial system, every financial institution. So that's what we do. But I think that was just the first step. I think that this was like a new idea, a new way of thinking. So we open the door to think differently, and we open a green agenda at the Central Bank of Paraguay. Well, the first thing is that we issue this norm. The second thing is that now the Superintendency of Bank has they have a risk-based supervision. So we add one more risk in their basket of risk. That was something new for us. We are thinking also in incorporate this evaluation risk in the Superintendency of Insurance. We decided to go further. We decided to replace all our fleet of cars by buying car moved by clean energy for the next 5 years. And I think that we were the first enterprise in Paraguay, either private or public, that has made that decision. We have a green day in the bank where everybody of us, all the workers, all our colleagues, we go to parks and we plant trees, because I think that we need to modify our genes and to think differently. We are working on a green finance agenda project. We decided to recycle all our deteriorated bills, both plastic and cotton. We are certifying our building as a green building. And I think that more importantly, we are starting to think differently to expand the table, to incorporate ONGs, and to incorporate and to be part also of the green agenda of the government.
Thank you very much. Let's go back to Fiji, DJ Esala. And maybe you want to share with us what has the Reserve Bank of Fiji done in advancing policies for disaster preparedness and response.
Thank you, Alfred. I think in the Reserve Bank of Fiji we've done quite a lot, and I think a lot of it is driven by necessity. I think living in the Pacific, we talk about living at the cold face of climate change. I think the World Bank put out some statistics that ranked the countries in the world according to the losses they suffer in terms of GDP. And out of the top 28 of those countries come from the Pacific. So I think that's probably my qualification for being on this panel. I don't profess to be an inclusive green finance expert or a financial inclusion expert. But if passion is a prerequisite, then I'm an expert in financial inclusion. But I think the way we look at it, we've done, ever since I can remember, we've had a national disaster recovery facility in the bank, ever since I can remember. I've been in the bank now for 22 years, and ever since I can remember, we've had a facility called a National Disaster Recovery. We've had an import substitution facility, which almost a decade ago, we included renewable energy. Around 10 years ago, we mandated that the bank start directing funds towards renewable energy projects, and that included mitigation and also adaptation. And we like to see, I think we are driven by how we see climate change in the Pacific. And one of the big, how these lenses, or how we frame our responsibility as financial regulators. And the first one that I wanted to mention was we see the sheer enormity of it. Assessments done on our economy tells us that we need $5 billion to finance resilience to climate change. Resilience, just to weather the effects of adverse climatic events in the country, in Fiji, costs $5 billion. That's more than the total lending in the entire financial system. So that's the enormity of it. The total lending in the financial system at the moment is $4.5 billion. We need $5 billion just to finance resilience. Another $3 billion to finance the transition towards meeting our national determined the carbon emissions, reducing our carbon emissions. Another $3 billion. So that, to us, the enormity of the challenge of climate change dictates that it requires everyone's effort, from private sector, government. We can't leave it to government, we can't leave it to financial regulators. The other issue I wondered how we see this is this intricate link between financial inclusion. Alfred mentioned it in the opening remarks, and climate change. That climate change affects the bottom of the pyramid disproportionately, and this is the same sector that we are targeting with our financial inclusion efforts to lift this sector out of poverty. The World Bank report that Alfred mentioned is threatening to push these people back into poverty. The Deputy Director mentioned in the working group convergence session that if we don't address this issue of climate change, we run the risk of losing the hard-won gains that we have done with financial inclusion. So another way that we look at this is that we need to double down on our financial inclusion efforts. We need to, as we've been talking about, accelerate the efforts. Financial inclusion to strengthen the resilience of the people at the bottom of the pyramid, to lift them out, to improve their resilience on weathering these adverse climatic events is one of the ways that we can improve or address this issue of links between financial inclusion and climate change. And just finally, the final 2 points I wanted to mention, Alfred, if I may. One is the time dimension. Climate change, you talked about us central bankers and us lifting interest rates and causing disturbances in the economy. I know a lot of us understand that as central bankers, we do a lot of things based on, we are conditioned to think long term. The public may not agree with us, but often we make decisions and we are challenged by it, but we always look long term. And I think climate change presents for civil society, for all players, the ultimate challenge between this trade-off of long-term and short-termism. And it's everywhere. In the report that AFI put out, we talk about those yellow protesters. They were protesting a levy that was supposed to improve the fuel efficiency. The same thing is happening in the Pacific. To meet our carbon dioxide emissions reductions, we want to improve the efficiency of all the ships that traverse the Pacific, but that will increase trade by 20%, because just the cost of the transformation will bump up the cost of trade in the Pacific. So climate change presents that ultimate challenge between short-termism and long-termism. And just the final point that I wanted to make is that the choices that we make. As Leah had mentioned, I was looking at a video the other day and I heard the Excellency President of this nation, Paul Kagame, when he was talking in Charlotte, I think, the US, and he talked about how this nation has developed. How this nation has developed since 1994. And he talked about, the quote that he said is, we have to make choices, difficult choices, about what we want to achieve. We don't follow rules, we follow choices. So I think when we talk about climate change, we talk about the challenges of metrics, how do you measure, definition, taxonomy, but do we allow ourselves to be blinded by these challenges, or do we be driven by choices and the opportunities? And I think the choice is clear. Thank you, Alfred.
Thank you for the statement, DG. I think it will be recorded and it will be used. But it provokes me to ask my fellow panelists here. Anyone wants to react to what DJ Asala brought forward? I mean, we talked about enormity, he talked about the time horizon, and of course he talked about the choices. Any reaction from you?
Yeah. I just want to share my opinion, want to express what I feel. I think that there is no time to build awareness. According to that questions, there are too many people thinking about it. I think that any institution can make a big change, especially if it's a central bank, a superintendency, or whichever institution, we can make a big change. We have an expression in Spanish, we just throw to the pool. You say when you don't have to analyze, you just throw to the pool without knowing if there is water or not. And what we did in Paraguay was we throw to the pool, we see we have to do this, we have to take this type of action, and we did it. And we have two types of projects or roads. One was inclusive finance. We have a strategy, and we were starting to thinking about environmental risk and how the central bank could be a leader, a transformer of our society. And I was very impressed when I came here to AFI. This is my first meeting, the first time that I'm here. And what I found is that now the understanding is that inclusive finance and also environmental risk goes hand by hand. So I think that my presence here will be I'm being very enriched, and I know that I will pick the phone to ask many questions to Alfred, especially now that we are revising our new strategy plan. We are going to incorporate all the environmental issues, and I think that it will be a very transformative tool for my country. Thank you.
Do we have two short ones from you, and then we invite our audience? Perhaps Elsie first, and then Andreas.
Okay, Alfred, I think my brother from Fiji couldn't have said it better. So he said it so eloquently. The challenges are real. It's happening now. It's enormous. The timing is now, and all hands on deck. And in Ghana, we're following that philosophy. We as central banks are leading the way. The Banking Association is leading the way, and we hope that as banks begin to report on how they're implementing these 7 principles, and people begin to see the impact, that will be a catalyst for all to come on board. So we're really leading the way, hoping that others would follow. We can't do it alone. Financial inclusion is intricately related to this. The more we empower people at the bottom of the pyramid, especially women and the youth, with financial inclusion and access to affordable and suitable financial services, the more prepared they are to make the shifts that they need to make, also in response to what is happening. So that's what I wanted to add to the debate.
Thank you for this addition. Andreas, against your global perspective and background, how do you view what the central bankers have just told us now?
Well, let me just say, the older I grow, sometimes the less I think I know about the future. But one thing I'm absolutely convinced, that the international agenda and the international development agenda will be dominated, at least for the next decade, if not for the next couple of decades, by 2 issues: sustainability and climate. Inclusive green finance will be an absolute key element for sustainability and climate. That includes green finance in all different dimensions of redirecting any kind of capital flows towards a green, climate-friendly, low-carbon and long-term oriented investment. I would like to say 2 things very clearly. Point number 1, there will be a tremendous additional funding for the issues of climate change and sustainability, and financial and insurance market regulators and supervisors, banks, insurers and pension funds should get on the move. The future belongs to the quick one. And the second point, and with this I also come already to the end, this will also require a much closer cooperation between finance and insurance regulating bodies at national, at regional, and also at global level. And I think AFI will play an important role there.
Thank you, Andreas. So we would like to pick a few views from the audience, and you will find a microphone which is rolling around. So please raise your hand if you want to add or to ask a question, and I would request you to limit this contribution to 1 minute. Do we have anyone, please? And please identify yourself, although, I mean, I do know you, but maybe not the rest. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Walid Ali. I'm from Central Bank of Egypt. I am the chair of the Inclusive Green Finance Working Group, and it's an honor to be elected for this post. I would like to congratulate Central Bank of Ghana for issuing their sustainable finance principles. And actually, my question is, in one of those principles, the Central Bank of Ghana will be promoting the ESG pillars, which is the environment and social and governance. But how Central Bank of Ghana is planning to work on changing the banking perceptions, or the bankers' perception, that going sustainable and green means making less profit. You know that bankers will remain bankers, and return on equity will remain one of their top priorities. So that's a challenge to prove that it doesn't contradict with each other. Thank you.
Anyone else? Please feel free. You are very welcome.
Good afternoon.
There.
Hi.
Okay, great. Thank you.
The Bank of Japan.
From Bank Negara, right?
Yes, Thomas from Bank Negara. The Bank of Japan has a facility that offers below market interest rates to financial institutions in Japan to support for green businesses. May I have use of the pen on this, please?
So is it a question or is it a contribution?
It's a question. Just that facility is offered by the Bank of Japan. Just wanted to understand from the viewpoint of the panelists, what is their view on the central bank offering such a facility to encourage lending by FIs towards green businesses. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we have covered this kind of intervention through the 4P framework under the provision bucket. I think this is captured, so we can follow up this question. Thanks very much, Thomas. Do we have one more? Yes, I see a hand there from the lady, or? Yes, please. I think in the middle. Thank you.
Thank you. One of the things about planting of trees is that it's not enough just to plant the trees. They have to be sustainable. And for sustainability, they need water along with sunlight and all other things. So what Indian businesses found is that to make them sustainable, it was very difficult just to plant trees and, keep on increasing cost of water and other related inputs for the plants. So one of the companies did a very interesting work. What they did is they planted some of the best mangoes. India is known for mangoes. And they planted some of the best saplings of mangoes, which in turn were exported. And those mango trees by themselves became a business model, which was sustainable as well as earning foreign exchange. So just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Thank you for this very nice example. So we have two questions. The first one I would first of all address to Elsie. It came from Egypt. It went anyway to you, but I wanted to add what I did not spell out earlier when you in fact referred to the connection between the green finance and the macroeconomic stability. And your question from Egypt is actually, well, how can investment in green be profitable enough, right? I mean, that was basically your question. And when I read through some of the speeches from ECB board members recently, they're also engaged in the NGFS, an important argument that I found there throughout was that investment in green could actually hamper stability if we don't get it right. Although we are saying there is green and macroeconomic stability connection. So that's the other side of the argument, which maybe goes hand in hand with what you are saying. So what do you think, Elsie?
Sure. Thank you, Alfred. So to respond to my brother from Egypt, as I said before, these principles were not handed down by the central bank to the banks. It wasn't a top-down approach. These were jointly developed by the banks, so they had every opportunity to craft something that they felt they could live by. Secondly, as I said, the banks themselves have reiterated the fact that it's not just a nice thing to do, but it actually makes business sense, and it affects their bottom line. So the bank CEOs have shared examples recently of how non-performing loans have increased as a result of loans that are made into unsustainable economic activities, right? And so you lend to a mining venture or to some fishing venture, and as a result of unsustainable practices, you're not able to recover the loan. So it ties in directly with even financial stability. NPLs arising as a result of poor lending practices and not living by these principles, as well as macroeconomic stability. I gave the example of cocoa, which is a mainstay of the economy. As a result of extreme weather conditions we're seeing, cocoa production levels are dropping. And that's a critical macroeconomic problem for us. Okay, I talked about mining and I talked about oil and gas, which are all mainstays of the economy. If we're not able to conserve these resources, the future of the economy itself is at stake. Secondly, we don't want an economy that is working for certain parts of the population. So to the extent that we want to make this an all-inclusive growth agenda, it is important that we're conducting these economic activities in a sustainable manner and also with some social justice as we go along. So I hope I've answered both questions in the time that we have.
Thank you. Let me quickly touch upon the question from Thomas from Bank Negara, Malaysia, referring to the example of the Bank of Japan apparently offering refinancing for these purposes, green finance. Can I have two quick answers from the two high-level central bankers here on the panel? Maybe Salah first, and then Jose. Thank you.
Thank you, Alfred. I think for us at the Reserve Bank of Fiji, we have that same facility. And like I mentioned, we've had it for a long time. We have directed lending facilities for areas that require it, like import substitution. We extended it for green finance. It goes back to the enormity of the challenge that we're facing. It can't be done by government alone. Government budgets can't do it on its own. So you need, and the need is to get the funds flowing, the required funds that will finance adaptation, will finance mitigation. So it's about that. And when we are clear, like I said, the choices you make, we get criticized for these special facilities. Is it really achieving its objective? Where is the evidence? We are thinking of how we need to put out evidence that, but like I said, do we wait for this or do we address something that we constantly face, as Elsie mentioned? We're seeing the impacts of climate change on the financial system, the rising insurance claims that's forced the insurers to run down their books, reduce their exposures and the like. So I think the choice for us is clear. Everyone needs to get their shoulder to that wheel. It's an enormous challenge that requires, so that is where we choose to finance some of these facilities.
So thanks for confirming the relevance from the Fijian perspective. What about Paraguay?
Well, the role of the central bank is not to lend directly to banks or to the private sector, but we have started a conversation with the second-tier public bank in Paraguay, which is the one that lends to banks and so that they can lend to the private sector. And we are starting to design a financial architecture so that they can get funds at a very low rate, so that in turn the private banks will have funds with low interest rate.
Yeah, you see, I want to close the session, but there is request for small points to be clarified. Please,
I need
DJ.
to clarify this from what Central Bank of Paraguay mentioned. The facility that we have, we don't bear the credit risk. We lend it to the banks, but the banks can only tap into this facility when they meet the renewable energy requirements. We don't fuss about, we just adjust it as we go along. The taxonomy is still, definition aspects are still out there. But I just had to clarify that. So we don't lend directly to the private sector. There is no credit risk. The banks bear it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We take it. I mean, this is an important topic, and we owe this to the audience. So please, Elsie, I think you also wanted to make a small point.
So thank you, Alfred. The Bank of Ghana doesn't have such a facility that lends directly to banks for this purpose. However, we have pioneered what we call the agricultural finance risk-sharing mechanism, by which banks are supposed to promote sustainable agricultural practices and lend accordingly to agricultural value chains. Now, in so doing, this facility provides some insurance, if you will, some credit loss insurance, and other risk-sharing mechanisms that they can tap into. So on the whole, we feel that that is one example in which we are helping to de-risk as banks are promoting sustainable banking. Beyond that, we expect that in the application of these 7 principles, the banks then become eligible to access green finance pools around the world. And so that's another opportunity the banks themselves recognize by applying these principles.
Thank you very much for this addition. Jose, have you changed your mind?
No, just a last, I just want to, there is a saying of Martin Luther King that says something that if tomorrow were the end of the world, today I will plant a tree. And I think that we are at a point where we have to plant forest. So that's why I really appreciate the leadership of Leah. We need Leah in Paraguay.
Thank you so much. Well, this is a very nice statement, and I would like to keep us to keep that in mind. But before we go, Andreas, when you walk away from this panel, what is your wish?
It's a very simple wish. Let's plant trees and hope that the world still will be existing for some time.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for this discussion. Thank you very much for your attention and input. I want not only to thank the panelists and especially Leah, who has traveled from Uganda to join us here and to share her concern. Let me also say that this panel was very rich in terms of, we talked about the concerns, we talked about the relevance, we talked about the solutions. And I think that is a very good start for us to start our work. Before we go, let me once again thank Leah for coming here and sharing with us. And of course, this forum can only encourage you to continue what you are doing, as Andreas has said, and keep the spirit. And perhaps one day, a long time from now, from your perspective down the road, maybe you will sit on such a panel, and perhaps you can look back to what you have achieved. We really look forward to this, and we wish you all the best. Thank you, Leah. Now, I also would like to thank the panelists for your contribution and for the time that you have made available and for sharing your thoughts. Thank you so much. Now, it is time to not only to, of course, encourage all our members to take action in this area based on what we have heard today, but also to introduce at the end now our new working group. That is the working group on inclusive green finance. We had the opportunity that the new chair has already introduced himself, so therefore we are already very aware, but I'm aware that we have a slide that introduces now this new working group, which in fact is then also the official launch of this group at this Global Policy Forum. This is the Inclusive Green Finance Working Group with all its members, and I suppose that Johanna Niemann, who is facilitating this work, will be in the position to accommodate more institutions. Yeah, you see, she did like that. That means please come and join the working group to do this very important work. Thank you very much and have a good afternoon.
Ladies and gentlemen, if we may give them another round of applause. Great appreciation goes to Ms. Leah Namugera from Uganda for reminding us again our duties towards the issue of climate change. Can we give Leah another round of applause, please? Thank you, Dr. Alfred Hanning, for moderating this rich discussion on inclusive green finance. And with that said, we're going to take a 30-minute short break, so we should be here slightly before 4 o'clock for our last session, our last plenary session. This is our last day. We are heading towards the end. And our last session will be on financially including the invisible, how technology has economically empowered forcibly displaced youth. So we're off for a 30-minute break. Please enjoy our coffee, our Rwandan coffee, and we'll see you back shortly. Thank you.